G'day everyone, Matt Elder here. Just thought I'd do a quick little video recording on properties and cycles. As at the time of recording in March 2018, last month, the Bank of England, through their guidance, made indications that they were going to be increasing interest rates over the coming period of time, and that sent the stock market into a bit of a spin and a tiz, and it went down and up and wiping value off and recovering it and all the rest of it, and was starting to head into some potentially turbulent times. So it's a matter of just taking a step back in terms of property and sort of seeing it in some wider cycles. Now, these are just ideas and theories. As with anything, they're just put out there, something to have a bit of a think about. They're not things that can necessarily set your watch by, but just ideas to keep in mind. So one of the first ones we want to talk about is the 18-year property cycle. And this is a matter of something which trying to make sense of what's been happening in the market over quite a long period of time and coming up with a stylized sort of version of this. Again, it's not a matter of something you can set your watch by. I'm going to just do a super brief recovery of it. For more information, the guys, Rob and Rob over at the Property Hub, you can see in the top here, have a link. They do a podcast and go into it in a lot more detail. But the general notion is that since the end of the Second World War, the property market in terms of house prices going up and down seems to be with a certain rhythm and a certain pattern that happens as outlined here. You have initially 7 years of growth in house prices, then there's some spooking in the market and just some corrections and so forth, and that can go up and down for a little bit, and then things recover and go on an upward trend for a while, and then around about this point here you get a lot of media attention and really hyping it up, and every man and his dog starting to get into the market and come along. So that then really pushes the prices up at a much faster rate. As with anything, at some point somebody goes, wait a minute, this is a bubble, this is nuts, or there's some external factor which then triggers prices to fall and crash back down, and then it takes another 4 years to recover. So you can sort of see over the last sort of 18-year time period, if you're going back, say from 1993, there was a 7 years to recover, got you to about 2001, bit of a wobble, then there's some pretty consistent growth up until about 2007, and then crashing back down in a very slow, meager recovery until about 2010, and then we're back over here to another 7 years, putting us about 2017, 2018, and are we in and amongst this wobble period right in here? So a matter of just being able to think, if you've got your portfolio or your property businesses, when prices and activity starts going in the wrong direction, is there enough of a cushion there for you to be able to absorb those changes and things? Now, with the regulator recently making mortgages and products more difficult for buy-to-let landlords and so forth, they may actually be inadvertently doing us a favor, because they're really forcing us as landlords to be in a more solid position with our portfolio, making sure that our debt levels are not too high, and as much as it might stop or slow down some of the growth that we might want to execute within our portfolios, then it's still putting us in a much safer place and giving more of a cushion. So there's a couple other things I just wanted to sort of talk about in more of a wider context on some cycles. So there's this idea of a 250-year revolution type cycle, basically saying every 250 years there's something out there which happens. So initially going back to 1517, you had Martin Luther going to the church door, nailing his 95 theses on that, sort of saying, wait a minute, maybe there's a few little issues here with the current way that the religious aspects of our life is set up, which then triggered the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation, and then all the things that came out of that. You go to another 250 years later, about 1765, you get to the point where the Americans decided that they got fed up of the British, that whole thing of taxation without representation, threw some tea in the Boston Harbor, and that kicked off all those things. And then if you go another 250 years from that, you started getting into around about this time, which, as we've seen in recent times, you've had the Arab Spring uprising, all that happening. You've had the issues within Russia and how all of that is starting to play out. Then you've also got the idea of an 84-year populist cycle, which basically comes down to the idea of the masses getting sick of the 1% running off with 50% of the wealth. So what are we talking about here? Again, if you go back to about 1765, you got the American Revolution, and then going on from that, another 84 years, you get the European revolutions, in around the time of Marx and the start of communism and those sorts of ideas. You go forward another 84 years from that, you get Hitler and the Great Depression and all those factors that played in there. And then if you're jumping off another 84 years from there, you're getting around about the time of 2017, which you're having basically the results of a long, very successful period of globalization where you're putting a lot of cultures together up against each other in a very short period of time, and the natural drawbacks which you're having from that. You're seeing, the classic thing of trying to build a wall with Trump and things, and countries becoming a lot more nationalist, make America great again, becoming more protecting their own economies and pulling back from that, as we've also seen with Brexit. And just to give a bit of I'm sure by now we've all heard of the 99% and we are the 99% and those sorts of things. If you look at what's been happening in 2009, you had the top 84 people in the world controlling 50% of the wealth. And then you go fast forward another 8 years later to 2017, 2018, you've gone from 84 people down to 48 people. So that concentration is getting much, much higher. So at some point, that doesn't necessarily become sustainable, and does that trigger off something else? Following on from that, you then also have 28-year financial crisis of some flavor. So 1989, we had all the issues there, which triggered most recessions in various countries. Going back 28 years before that, 1961, you had the crisis there, and then just following that back, 1933, 1905, So if you're looking at this 28-year cycle, 2017, we're a little bit past that now, but again, these are not things you can set your watch by. You look at issues of, while the stock markets are quite high, is that being artificially done through, in the UK, 435 billion of quantitative easing still in the economy, the underlying fundamentals, depending upon which ones you're looking at, are quite weak. A lot of the jobs that have been created over the last X number of years are replacing ones that were lost in the 2007 time period, but they're not a quality type job. They're the gig economy, they're the 0 hours contracts and those sorts of things. So then if you put those three together, we're at a potentially unique time where you've got them all converging in and around the time period that we're living in at the moment. So the question then becomes, if we are in this period where things are going to be soft for the next 1 to 5 years, as property type people, are our businesses resilient enough to withstand that? Do we have comfortable debt levels? If we're starting to get more voids and more or if you, in terms of being a developer, and you're not getting either the prices that you originally thought you were, or you're having to hold it for longer and convert those to rentals, are you able to weather that out? So it's a matter of trying to protect the downside and really thinking, in terms of some areas, the market is not rising, it's going down, it's going sideways, it's moving in different directions. So the days of just, the pure growth aspect of the cycles and curves, we're in a different phase of that. And how do we respond to that as businesses? And the next sort of thing I want to layer over the top of this is a cradle to grave spending type cycle. And what this looks at, this is done from the American Census Bureau. Haven't had a chance yet to adapt it to the British economy, but I believe these these years might just be offset by a couple of years. So what we're really looking at here is the spending patterns of individuals. Now, usually it's not until you get to about 18 or a few years after that, if it's a further education, where you as an individual have enough discretionary spending and really starting to do it. Before that point, it's usually your parents or something of that flavor. So we're sort of starting off here. You're getting to about 26 and you start getting apartments. Then as you're moving up the ladder, you start getting starter homes. Then at 31, the idea then at 33, you're starting to need childcare because you've had kids. You keep on spending, and then the kids get older and that 2-bed flat just isn't cutting it anymore, so you've got to trade up your home at around about 41, get something bigger. Then after that, it takes you a few years to kit that out with all the furniture and get some nice quality things. And then as you're starting to get towards about the age of 51, the kids then are starting to go off to further education, so then you've got to pay for that. A couple of years on from that, when you stop paying for that, then you get to this point where you've got big family cars with no kids anymore, so you're getting rid of those, and you're getting some nice cars, and the midlife crisis a little bit later on, and getting the ones that you really like. Moving on from that, once you're starting to get towards the age of 60, you're then starting to have more expenses on hospitals and related things. Then you're getting to the retirement age of about 65, and you're starting to go, at least from the UK, and this cold weather is just crazy. I want to go and live in Spain for part of the year, and having retirement homes and things like that. Going down along to the age of 70, where it's starting to get to the point where not as mobile and nimble, and you just want to have a break but have everything there, and go and see some places so you can get on and off the cruise ships. And then as you're trailing off down there, there's some prescription drugs, those expenses increases, and then all the way down to nursing homes when you're 84, which is largely females because of the differences between male average life expectancy and females. So what this is trying to do is basically point out that up until say 40, 46, 51, that's when people en masse are spending a lot more and putting money into the economy in goods and buying goods and services. Beyond that, people start to ease off, and they've got other considerations and starting to plan for retirement and making sure they've got enough money to live on past that. So what this is all just driving at is a lot of demand for products and services are baked in to the natural cycles when people are born, or they're originally created decades previously. Because if we're looking at the rough ages between 26 onwards, then from 26 naturally go back 26 years from before that. So what does this all sort of mean or point to? What we've done here is we've taken from the Office of National Statistics the birth rate since, on the left-hand side, it starts from 1900 and then it goes all the way up to 2016. And you can see the peaks and troughs and how it all sort of works out. Now, a couple of key things that we're looking at here, the baby boomer generation is very clearly demarcated in this area here, with the spikes after the war. You get into the Gen X, and then you get into some of the millennials. So what you're starting to see now is, as mass, a lot of the baby boomers are 60 and 60 plus. So they're starting to spend in different parts of the cycle. And also, as we saw in the previous graph, as they start to get it up into these more advancing years in age, they're actually spending less. So there's less going into the economy. Then what you also then have is the decrease there, just by the sheer numbers and the size at that point in time, is the slack is not being picked up by Gen X and Gen Y. So then being aware of where those relative spending patterns are and how that's been decreasing. In this instance, we also haven't taken account of net migration, which then puts another factor onto it, but then how you're accounting for that specifically, and how the government wants to change what they are and not what they are and what they aren't sort of counting, whether it's students or so forth, for political purposes. So just pulling that aside for a moment. But then also too, it's a matter of looking at, if you're doing HMOs, then looking at your demand, if your target age is, people who just got their first jobs, coming out, getting into the workforce, then you're looking at people who are, 20s to mid-20s and that sort of thing. Okay, going back 20 odd years from where we are now, you're starting to be in and around the point here where you had the birth rates drop off. So as for HMOs, as the people are getting older and they're transitioning into either other single-let accommodation or purchasing houses, they're not being replaced at the same rate as those which are starting to move in, coming out and starting to work. So that's allowing for more of a sluggish demand. And then if you overlay on top of that potentially oversaturation in the HMO market, and then also too the fact that you're getting a lot of the Europeans going home due to Brexit, their pound going 20% or 18% less than what it did before, you've potentially got a real slump in these sorts of things. But then if you're looking at a different extreme of the market in terms of designing sort of luxury retirement homes, then you've got all this generation of that baby boomers who are prime and into that sort of area. And then the same sort of thing, it comes down to what's happening within a single-let rental market where the families are moving. So it's a matter of taking all these factors into consideration. So you're looking at things which can involve, a general notion of an 18-year property cycle. Again, it's not something that can set your watch by. You're factoring in other 250-year, 84-year, 28-year, other just general cycles and populist type ideas into that. And then when you look at the birth rate, what's your effectively created demand from when people were born many years ago, taking into all these considerations into your property business and seeing how robust and how it will hold up with that. Now again, it's a matter of just taking these into considerations. If you're looking at, the snowflake which triggers the avalanche and trying to predict this exactly, then that's kind of not relevant. It's a matter of, well, is this avalanche building up? Whereabouts is it? Where's it potentially going to come from? And taking this and making sure that your business model and plans are robust enough to be able to withstand this. So I know I've covered that, and this quite quickly, and it's quite dense, and partially why I've also done this video, so you can go back and start looking at it again. But if there are any further questions or anything like that, you can reach out to me at matt@mattelder.com. It's probably the best way. Just pop me an email. Be happy to have a chat with anyone. Thanks very much for listening, and have a great day.